Good afternoon and welcome back to Dynamics 365 Human Resources web series. We're going to continue to talk about how to configure the system, and now we're actually moving into how you create an employee. So in my previous video, I actually created this employee. We talked a little bit about work summary and some of the fields that are applicable. Today, we're going to talk about the name details and the addresses. So the name details, there's a new functionality that just came out in which you can actually change the name of the worker and keep a record of it. And to demonstrate that to you, I actually have changed the name of this employee. So in my previous video, if you would have seen, the name was Ahmed Bernat, and now I've actually changed it to Michael Bernat. So the easiest way to do it, obviously, is by clicking change worker name. You put in the first name or the last name, whichever is applicable, that's going to get changed. Of course, you want to make sure that the search name is changed because it doesn't get picked up by the first name or the last name. And you simply say, click OK or save. Once you save it, you can go into the name history and you can see that Ahmed Bernal was changed at April 15th. And it was changed to Michael, and Michael became effective on 4/15. Just a split of a second difference between the name change. And it's very important to actually have this functionality, and which is why Microsoft decided to put this through in the module itself. One reason that I've seen in my implementations is when a spouse gets, or when somebody gets married to a spouse and they end up taking their last name, and at that point, if you are covered with benefits, for instance, then you would need to report your change of last name to that vendor in order for you to be covered in the benefits that you are paying for, or at least your organization is paying for. So that's one of the use cases where you would want to know how to change the name. And of course, you change your mapping and all the sophisticated integration that we probably won't touch here based on the name change and when you create those files, payroll files, and those benefit files that are sent out to the vendor itself. So that is the functionality that's very important for you to know. It's very easy, of course, very simple, but not knowing how to do it or if this was available is the piece that you would want to know. Whereas the display as name, there's different functionalities or different options that you can display this name on the list of employees. So you can also make that universal, and we won't touch that here because it's a different module, but you can make this universal in the organization administration. So if you configure organization administration, we'll probably talk about it a little bit down the road, but you can make this display name as universal across the legal entity, and every single name is going to be displayed as that. So in this case, you would want to avoid mismatches. So Michael Burnett, for instance, can be first, middle, last. That's how it's displayed. Someone else could be last, middle, first, and then it's just going to be a mess when you're actually going through the list of employees, active employees. So you just want to make sure that you can keep this as is for your preference, but ideally when you're configuring it, you should ask your client how should the name should be displayed on the list of active employees. Moving on to addresses. So addresses can be configured in organization administration, or you can create a new address and it just gets created in the organization administration. So in order for you to create an address, you simply click add and a tab opens up. The name, give it a name or a description, which is basically right here what you see. Could be home or could be office. The purpose you need to select. This is also configurable. You can configure this, even though it doesn't look like you can click on view details. That's normally something that how we do configuration when we want to go to that page, but this is sort of a special configuration that you can do through organization administration. So something to know for sure, because you'll always run into a scenario where your client is going to say, can you change the purpose, because none of these purposes matter to me, or can I delete some of these purposes because none of them matter to me. Right? So you can do that in the organization administration. So no, you won't be able to do it through the HR module. But here you have to select a purpose. So, click home, for instance, and then the country region. So you'll have a list of countries that you can select from. So you want to make sure that it is applicable to the legal entity that you are configuring in. Zip code. So even though you won't find a zip code here, you can always enter a new zip code. Now, one thing that you would want to know is that you can import these addresses, and that's a very recently introduced feature. It's a really good feature. What you can do is get a list of addresses from a post office, a full list of addresses for your whole city, and you can easily import that into the system. That way, you don't need to create the addresses every time. So right here, for instance, these addresses have been created. So more or less, these have been migrated through a post office document. And here you could see that I can simply select the county. All I need to do is just search it up, and then it'll give me the county, and I can select that. So that's the applicable zip code to them. And then here I would have to add the street address, which would be like 123 South 21st. Street number, if you want to separate that out, sure, street number is applicable here. And building complement. So building complement is actually the apartment number. So if there is an apartment number associated with it, with the address, then this is where you would want to put it. Normally, you could put it in the street as well, and write APT 504, for instance. But best practice would be to enter it in a different field, just for formatting purposes. And then post box, it's actually the same thing as zip code, but this is a US entity, so the post box is applicable there. City, district, state, and county, so everything, all of that is actually applicable to US. You wouldn't see any of it if you want to configure this to a specific legal entity, and of course you do that in the organization administration. So in my previous video, we talked about how you can set up address book in organization administration. This piece is also set up there as well. And we won't talk about that just because we don't want to deviate away from our objective here to configure the human resources module. And of course, you can pick as a primary address, make it private. These are simply just toggle buttons that you can use for reference purposes. And you press OK. So once you press OK, a record is created here. If you want to edit, you can click on edit and simply edit the information, press OK, and then everything will be edited. Now, in my previous video, I talked about the office address here. So right here, you can't change the office address, and it's obviously being pulled by somewhere, which is why it's grayed out. It's actually being pulled from here. So you could see that 123 Coffee Street, so there's an address associated with it. What you need to do is go into more options and say assign to office location. So if I assign this home address to office location, I should see 123 South 21st. So I see the home address being populated here. And that's how you actually, configure the home office address there. For all employees, you can also do that. And that's of course done in the organization administration. So you can also do it at the employee level or at the granular or bigger level, which would be org administration. You can always remove it, and then you can always select the other address associated with it. And if you want to go a little bit further, we can talk about the contact information in our next video, and from there we'll move on to the work history, and that is something also very important for you to know. So with that, I'll leave you with all the information that is available to you to play around with the module. And as we start configuring, as you start entering some more information on this employee, we're going to talk about how you hire them to a position.